There is a season in prophetic development when your gifts activate before you are aware that they are present. And that specific season can create a tension or friction in your environment and relationships. And I want to talk about that. I received a lot of feedback on my prophetic development model that I posted the other day. If you want to watch that video, tap this comment, you can go back. But this comment led me to breaking down one of the phases in that prophetic development model, which is the gift activation without mastery phase. And it's basically known as the raw power phase, where you experience power, you experience your gifts, but you are unaware that they are there, and you're unaware of the magnitude that they present. So this commenter asks, what's my advice, or how do you overcome times when it feels like your atmosphere has more control than you do? And this happens with a lot of prophetic people, if not everyone, in their early development stages. So this is where power is real, but perception is incomplete. So we're going to talk about how the gift is active, the authority is not yet established, and the character is still catching up to the weight of the power, the weight of the gift, the weight of the impact. So I have a few points, probably about 9 points that I want to make with you. And if you're familiar with my content, grab a pencil, save it now, share with a friend. This is going to be a winded one, but a good one. First things first. Number one, you do not experience yourself the way other people experience you. And that was the first lesson that I had to learn in this particular phase. You might experience obedience. You think God is telling you to do something, but other people will experience impact. You experience God giving you a surprise, maybe an atmosphere shift, and God shifts you to respond to the atmosphere. Other people will experience intensity. When you're using your gifts, oftentimes you're just as startled as everyone else. And so when someone doesn't understand that, they're just going to say it's intense. They're just going to label it the way they experience it. So in my experience, when I was, at that stage, I recall being very intense. Praise the Lord, very intense. And that was because it was unyielded power. But what I noticed was, as I'm watching people experience me, I noticed them pull back. I noticed people get quiet. I noticed people become very cautious around me, very cautious of their words, the way they behaved. And then some of them even became suddenly fascinated with me. But one of the things that I noticed was, it doesn't immediately register to me. It didn't immediately register to me as it was related to my gifts. I just attributed to we're just not aligned. Like, they don't like me for whatever reason, and that's fine. I just left it at that. But in this stage, what many people do is they assume that they are too much. They assume that it's, their personality that's causing all this tension between them and other people. They also assume that maybe people just don't like me, like I did. Like they just don't like me. But it's not a lack of maturity. It's a lack of embodied awareness, right? Which is developed over time and formation. As it relates to number two, their distance is diagnostic. It is not a moral judgment, okay? So one of the first external signs of this phase is the relational shifts that you'll see. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because power often reorganizes itself in relational dynamics. So you'll notice how, like I said before, people get quiet, they distance themselves from you. Some people admire you from afar, but they don't engage. Some people will try to control or contain you. Some people suddenly want access to you without responsibility, okay? They don't want to reciprocate anything. They just want to be in your proximity, okay? So that's number two. Then there's this other part in this stage where there becomes a control attempt. And this is usually seen in leaders, right? When people haven't embodied their own authority, this is what happens. They often respond to emergent authority, in one of two ways. Fear, which means they're going to distance themselves, or insecurity, which means they're going to try to control the gift. When people can't steward what they don't understand, they try to muzzle it. And this doesn't come because you're dangerous. This is because raw power exposes insecurity. Number four, this one happens a lot. All these happen to me, okay? Being used before you can use your gift. So it's like you are not aware that they are utilizing your gifts, but they are aware, right? And this is actually one of the most painful truths of this entire phase, until you identify it, until you recognize it, okay? Before you know your power, other people will benefit from it. They'll try to platform it. They'll try to extract from it, and they'll try to define it for you. Now, this isn't always malicious, and sometimes it's unconscious, but it isn't always malicious. But this is where discernment comes into play, because we begin to ask ourselves some questions. One is not the question of how am I being, how do I wield my power? Rather, the question we want to be asking ourselves is, where am I being received versus utilized? Okay, and that's the big question here, because being received is much different than someone just using you for your gifts. But that distinction only comes through visible character development, not technique. So since we're talking about learning how to wield our power, mastery in this phase isn't about controlling it. It's about character development, okay? We don't learn mastery by dialing ourselves down, managing our impressions, or performing humility. We have that pretty bad. That false humility thing is a thing. Or suppressing our gifts. We don't learn mastery that way. We learn it through growing in self-awareness, developing emotional and spiritual maturity, understanding relational dynamics, learning where you are truly welcomed and not just useful. As character is developed, as character matures, your awareness increases, your discernment is sharpened, your authority is established, and your power is stabilized. None of this happens because you focus on the power itself and the gifts itself. It's because you're focusing on becoming whole. So in that season, I wasn't focused on becoming someone who could wield the gifts. I was learning how to become someone who could carry those gifts, because mastery doesn't come from restraint. It comes from formation. Now, number 7, this is where it gets tricky, and it leads to this question. When unyielded power enters a room, the room is affected whether we intend for it or not. Because before mastery, prophetic people don't just perceive environments, they absorb them. So in this phase, you don't just walk into rooms, you merge with them. You don't just receive information, you carry it. You don't just observe emotional and spiritual climates, you inherit them. So instead of reading the room reads you. This is when your power is unwielded, okay? This means that you have zero control, all right? So this is why in early prophetic development, it feels exhausting. It feels disorienting. It feels emotionally heavy, especially after in gatherings, meetings, or churches, or any type of leadership space, right? This is what happens. One of the hardest lessons to learn is that not everything you feel belongs to you, right? So early on in prophetic development, prophetic sensitivity lacks boundaries, not accuracy. So you're feeling right, you just have to not identify with it, okay? So in this space, when you're identifying with the room, people will experience sudden mood shifts, emotional heaviness that appears out of nowhere, anxiety, grief, agitation, especially after being around certain people, confusion about your own internal state, right? So the mistake isn't feeling it, it's identifying with it. So instead of asking yourself this or telling yourself this is information, it becomes this is me. So you're taking on the room and you're taking it on as yourself. This leads to burnout, self-doubt, and spiritual confusion. So the goal isn't to focus on your power and learning how to yield it or wield it. It's learning how to submit to your process of development in character formation and how God is developing and refining you. You're growing through self-awareness, spiritual maturity, emotional maturity, nervous system regulation, identity anchoring, learning where your responsibility ends. So in closing, the prophetic journey is about learning how to enter rooms without inheriting them. Mastery begins when you can receive what's being revealed without carrying what was never yours. This is a long video. God bless you.